me talking about two important concepts for undergrads interested in doing research. The first is how to even get a research position and how to get into a lab. And the second will be how to succeed in the lab. So we have three PhD students with us today who all have experience doing research as undergraduates previously, and who also have experience mentoring undergraduates in the lab. So we can start with introducing everyone here. So Emma, if you want to go first and give a little background about the kind of work you do, and then like the style of work too, like wet lab, animal work, anything like that. And then your experience as an undergrad researcher.
Okay. Hi, I'm Emma. I just finished my third year in the Neurosciences PhD program. So currently I work in a wet lab with invertebrates. We do a little bit of computational work, but it is mostly in the wet lab. My current project that I'm focusing on right now has to do a little bit more with overall biology, but it is how the gut and brain interface in the context of what you're eating and how that shapes your future appetite. And so my experience as an undergrad was I started working my sophomore year of undergrad, and I stayed in the same lab for 3 years, I guess, yeah, until I graduated. And in my last year, I did an undergraduate senior thesis. So I bled or co-led a project that was later then published, which was very cool. After that, I did a little bit of post-bac work, and now I'm here.
Great, thank you. Sydney, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sydney. I just finished my fourth year in the neurosciences program. The work that I'm currently doing is pretty much completely computational and with human data, but I don't really collect a lot of my own data. I use a lot of available open data sets, and the subject of those research are pretty varied, but they have been clinical for the past few years, studying people with depression. And moving forward, I'm going into more cognitive, auditory cognition. As an undergrad, I was at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I started research at the beginning of my junior year. And I was in that lab for about a year and a half because I ended up graduating early, but really loved it. Worked as a lab assistant, lab manager right after that here at UC San Diego, and then ended up joining that lab for my PhD.
Great. Okay, Chiaki, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chiaki. Apologies for my voice, but I just finished my fourth year of my PhD. I currently study how mice navigate through space, and I study this specifically in the hippocampus. And so I try to understand how different molecules affect how we process space. In my undergrad, I studied how different drugs can affect neuropsychiatric disorders, specifically major depressive disorder. So I stayed there for a couple of years and then went straight from undergrad to work here at UCSD.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the first part, which is how to find research opportunities. So the first question is, how do I identify my research interests, especially if I've never done research and I'm only a freshman or sophomore?
Maybe they should start with a class that they've taken. If they had a subject, or maybe even in high school, that they felt particularly drawn to. I know I took an AP Psych class in high school, and my teacher started the neuroscience section by being like, you're all gonna hate neuroscience, but we just have to power through it. And I was like, I'm gonna love this. Yeah, and then I did. But maybe they have something like that, or they have a class that they're taking for their breadth requirements that could help point them in the right direction.
I think there's also interest groups, Colors of the Brain works with undergrads, but you can also join science clubs and things like that, and maybe hear from other distinct groups to see what research is on campus, whether that be talking to other students or talking to professors of your classes.
Yeah, I would say that I've heard of students finding their interest in a lot of different ways. Some people just oh, I heard this really cool podcast that gave me this really cool idea for a research project. Will we do something like that? Or something comes up in their classes that a student will have a lot of questions about. But actually turning that into a research project and experiencing what that research actually is in practice is very different. And ultimately, I think you just have to go for the opportunity for the first thing that you really vibe with and try it out and see if like the reality of the situation actually kind of matches your research interest.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of times I feel like what you think will be interesting in practice is very different.
Right. It all seems so glamorous until like you've like run the same line of code 17 times.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, next question. What is the best way to find a lab?
So I don't think there's like an exact recipe to finding a lab. I would say the way that I did it was like cold emailing professors. So classes that I was really interested in, I was like, I would love to come to a lab meeting or understand more about your research. And as we all know in graduate school, like PIs love talking about their research and we'll spare like 30 minutes to an hour talking about it. So if you have genuine interest, I definitely suggest like just cold emailing professors. And then there's other resources as well, and I'll let Sydney and Emma kind of take over.
Yeah, I mean, from personal experience, I was taking a class and I really liked the TA of this class, which was like cognitive neuroscience. And so in the first few days of the class, I had just started talking to her and I asked her if like what kind of research she was doing, what lab she was in, and if she like needed any research assistance. And we just went from there. But I know that like talking to your professors, cold emailing your professors is actually surprisingly successful, especially like if you like have FaceTime with that professor and they know you and you're not just like another email in their inbox.
Yeah, you could also, I know the undergraduate that I am currently mentoring, she found our lab through another undergrad who had started a research opportunity, like they were friends. And he was telling her about his research and she was like, that's really cool. So, I mean, maybe more friends too are also doing work and you can like talk to them about how could I come like talk to your PI? Like, could I come sit in on a meeting that you guys have, like Chiaki was saying?
Yeah, I really like that idea of just asking to sit in on lab meetings because that's pretty, low effort for the PI and will show that the students actually are interested. So that's a great idea. Okay, how many professors should I email, and is it rude to email 10 at a time or many at a time?
As long as you like get their names right and you like I wouldn't put 10 on the same email, like at least BCC them. But I would say if you're gonna do that, I would personalize the email. Like you should at least go to their lab website and know something about what they're doing. So then you can say, hello, Dr. So-and-so, I see that you do X work. Could I meet with you sometime to discuss this? Thank you so much. If you have any research experience, you could talk about it, but if not, I'm sure that's fine. But maybe don't mass email all of them.
Yeah, like you can have volume, but you should still have quality, right? So like you can email all of them, but your expectations for like them all wanting to join your lab is probably not going to be the case, but you can show enthusiasm, just as Emma said, like by individualizing the emails and things like that. I don't think it's rude, just because professors might not even reply. So
Yeah, I agree. Definitely personalize and yeah, don't expect every single person to respond. Yeah, I don't think I've had anything to add.
And then for follow-up,
yeah.
I was gonna say, and then for follow-up, like wait a week. Like you don't have to, it doesn't have to be like a day. It could totally be like 24 hours, like a whole week, and then just be like, hi, I'm still interested in your lab. If can spare some time, I'd really like to talk about it. So but they're not going to email you back quickly. It's just not how that works.
Yeah, that was my follow-up question that I get a lot is, how much time should they wait and how many times should they email them? I typically advise once, at most twice, if they're really interested in the lab.
Yeah.
Okay. How can I make my email stand out when I reach out to a professor?
I would like specifically, if you're really, really interested in the lab and their work, I would look up a very recent paper from the lab and mention it, and maybe mention a specific detail of that paper. Like clearly make it clear that you have put in the effort to learn about the research that you're doing and you're not just blanket cold emailing looking for the easiest bite. So
yeah, and you could work in like if you have some other reason why you're interested in this work, you could say like you know, like Sydney was saying, I read this paper that you recently published. It really connected with me because of Y reason. And then you've got like that you actually read and understood what they're doing. And even if it's not like the main point of the paper, if you can like pull out anything that's like showing that you can kind of like synthesize what they're doing, I think that's a good start.
And also, like most professors are teachers, right? So if you come in with a lot of questions, they're more than happy to answer them too. So just kind of be like, honestly, I think it's impactful, but I don't really understand these XYZ methods. And I'd really like to learn more. Is this what your lab does? And is there any way that I can help with that? I will say though, like if you're cold emailing, don't make a novel. Like don't write like so and so in my family had this neuropsychiatric disease, so therefore I want to like join your lab. I think it's too much of a like you're hitting them with too much information. Just kind of keep it short and simple and just say like, hey, I am interested in your lab. I've read and like connected with this paper. I'm interested, but I would like to ask more questions. Can we set up a meeting? Is this possible? And do you have the bandwidth to take on a student? Something very like short, simple, but to the point.
You can, I feel like you can also like mention, like if you have a TA in a teacher, like in a class that is in that lab, you can mention that TA by name, because then at least the PI can be like, yo, do you know this student? And there's that connection as well.
Mm-hmm. And then I do make students watch out for not just making it all about what they can get out of the experience, what they can bring to, even if they don't have prior research experience, just emphasizing that they have relevant coursework or interest is always good. Okay, next question that I get a lot is, what are some funding opportunities? Or how do you find funding opportunities?
So I was mentioning Colors of the Brain. I recommend following them on Twitter because they post a lot of on their funding opportunities on social media. But they host like a Kavli Scholar every year where basically like about 6 or 7 students get chosen that are usually like first-time undergrads that have never had experience in research themselves, usually of a minority background, but they take applications from everybody and they pick 6 or 7 scholars to like do research over the summer. So I think that's a really great opportunity, especially if you want like full-time research opportunities in a lab. And PIs are more likely to take you that way because they're like, oh, you have your own funding and you're going to be working here full-time. There's also the Trell Scholarship that I've told my undergrads to apply to. It's a quarter by quarter like based scholarship. So I think you get like a grant per quarter. It helps with like some research related things. Obviously, it's not going to cover everything, but at least can kind of get you paid during the quarters. So the application process is pretty simple. And I think it's only a couple essays, maybe like 2. And it's pretty low effort. So I think that's an easy one to kind of get funding through UCSD from.
So there's actually a resource on UCSD website that's like undergraduate research scholarships with a bunch of links that you can use to apply for, like the Starbucks Sustainable Solutions and Learning Opportunities Research Scholarship. There's a bunch of these. One that's not on this list that a few students in my lab have gotten is the Haligiolu Data Science Institute Scholarship. That one's like more on the data science, more on the computational side, but it's been a really good funding opportunity for some students in my lab.
I do know there's also the McNair Scholarship, which is pretty popular. And then Ford Fellowship, I don't know if that also covers undergrad, but I know that covers through grad.
I think it does.
Okay.
Additionally, if any of your students that you're mentoring are transfer students, there's an opportunity to like join Start Neuro as well. So I think in your second year, you can apply to be in Start Neuro, and you do like a training over the summer before starting at UCSD. And you also get funding throughout the year to go to conferences and to be in your labs. So it is a really highly paid position, which is nice.
Yeah, that one is really great because a lot of transfer students, I feel like they're behind because they're trying to catch up on requirements and don't think they have time for research. So that one is a really great program, definitely. Okay, how do I ask to get paid?
So I asked my undergraduate if she had any way that I just wanted to ask. And I feel like maybe we should be trying to, like, I don't know. I think that's uncomfortable for undergraduates to ask to get paid. So I feel like older members in the lab should run interference a little bit. Like I went to my PI and asked him if he was planning to pay her and if we could find a funding opportunity. But I think if they don't want to approach the PI immediately, you could approach like your mentor, like the person that you are working with, on a more close basis. Like if you're working with a grad student or you're working with a postdoc, approach that person first. And, I feel like nobody's gonna shut you down and like say no, but they might tell you how to be like very strategic about it. But I would say start a little lower on the lab food chain and then go up.
Yeah, it's always an awkward question to try to get funding. But I feel like most
Yeah.
PIs expect that you're going to get some form of payment or credit.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're interfacing directly with the PI, I'd say like there's a couple kind of like starter ways for that conversation. And I think probably one of the best ways is just saying like, having some sort of like understanding of what your responsibilities are in the lab, and then kind of setting an example or expectation of why you think you should be compensated. So it's awkward. I agree with Emma. I agree with everybody here, but I think you could be like, okay, my responsibilities currently are XYZ. I'm taking care of these things. I reliably spend this amount of hours per week doing this. And I think just like juggling all of these things is a lot for me without getting paid. Is there any possibility that we can find funding resources together for opportunities for me to still stay in the lab and work here and like increase my responsibility load, but also still be, compensated? So kind of just like laying out your responsibilities, because sometimes PIs forget, right? Like they don't know how many hours you work there. Maybe they know through a mentor, like all these other things. But if your mentor, that person in the lab that's taking care of you, isn't reliably like telling your PI how much you're working, they're not going to know exactly. So just lay out what you do.
And a follow-up question for that is, should I work for free in the lab?
I would say avoid it if you can. Try to be proactive about it, even though it's awkward. I know that a lot of labs, including my own, will have like a brief trial period for a student that is volunteer, or you're going to do your work for like a class credit. And that's just to make sure that like, oh, is the research a good fit for you? Do you like this? Like, are you enjoying is this the right place for you to be? And that way there's no like financial mess if you decide that it's not the right place for you after 3 months or whatever. So
Yeah, that's good for both parties. I feel like for the students, they don't have to commit if they get a full year of funding.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that and say like, yeah, I think it's important to try to get funding, and like if you are going to do a free trial period, just limit yourself, just because like it is a lot to ask of you, of your time, of your effort. Obviously make sure you're putting in effort, right? Like you want to show your best during that moments in time, but don't work for free forever. Like that's just going to be really hard on your mental health as well. So yeah, I would definitely, if you have to, restrict it as much as possible.
Yeah, I just want to like second exactly what Chiaki's saying, because I worked for free my entire undergrad and I really regret it. I was just never brave enough to ask for funding during the year, and it's a big regret of mine. So I think both Chiaki and Sydney are absolutely spot on.
yeah, I have the same regret for my undergraduate experience too. I was terrified of my PI. I never even thought of broaching the subject. So now I know a lot better, and that not all labs are like that, and that like if you're a great undergrad and you're giving good work, like you should get paid. Absolutely, 100%. So yeah.
I think it's a mark of a
Agreed.
good PI too, is that they preemptively say you either have to get paid or get credit for it. So it's something to watch out.
Yeah.
To follow up with that, a lot of students struggle because they say a lot of the experiences they're applying for already require experience. So how do they get initial research experience?
So I actually, before I joined my lab as a sophomore in that summer beforehand, I had found this like website that listed a bunch of summer undergraduate research opportunities. So I actually went to a different institution, did a summer internship, and then came back and was like, I have research experience, So I mean, and a lot of those opportunities over the summer are paid. I would say like a vast majority of them are paid. So maybe you could look into something like that, and then you come back to UCSD in the fall and you're like, look, I've got my research experience here, ready to go.
Yeah, I think that like research experience doesn't necessarily have to be like what you think that it is all the time. Like it doesn't have to be experience in a lab. Like I have experience students who will bring like projects that they worked on in some of like their data science or coding classes, and just like showing me that they like know how to do some of this stuff. Like that to me counts as experience. Yeah, in my uh in my trajectory, I didn't have any like explicit research experience in a lab, but I had like shadowed a radiologist who worked with MRI before, and I just like waxed poetic about how special that experience was to me in my interview, and that really came across. And I had done like some animal husbandry with some reptiles in a reptile lab that was totally unrelated, and it was more just, I don't know, I feel like, yeah, hopefully it's not totally essential and important to getting you in on that bottom floor, but it's frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, if you don't have an experience, like, and they're requiring experience, go ahead and try anyways, and just like apply with the skills that you already have, to see if even they would take you. But this could be a really good part of your like, or a really good way to balance of like putting a trial period on. Just saying like, hey, like maybe I don't have the experience, but I have the enthusiasm. I'm willing to work, and I have a lot of dedication, and these are the amount of hours that I'm willing to dedicate. And you know, if you are willing, like, to teach me, and you know, I'm available to like work, you know, for free for this amount of time, and I would love to train up so I can gain that experience. So leverage it in your own way. Just because like you don't have the like exact research experience doesn't mean that you aren't highly motivated to figure it out.
That actually leads perfectly into the second part, because I feel like what researchers are really looking for is more the enthusiasm and the motivation and the work ethic, rather than the actual knowledge and experience they have. Before we move on to the second part, which is how to succeed in the lab, do you guys have any more advice on how to get research positions, funding, how to find a lab? We can also come back to it at the end too.
I was just going to say, the way that I started my neuroscience career entirely was one of my friends in undergrad telling me that I should go to a graduate student research symposium with him. I was not planning to go. I didn't want to. And then I was there, and I like really loved it, and I asked a ton of questions, and I love talking to the graduate students and postdocs there. Like, just go and see like what UCSD has to offer, because there is so much science happening all the time. Even during the summers, there's like summer research symposiums or posters. You get to know like different scientists, and then talking to them face to face with a huge poster of all of their data is like really easy to bridge any type of conversation, and they're kind of required to talk to you. So I recommend doing something like a poster presentation, like showing up to one of those if you find them.
Yeah, I definitely second that. Like earlier this spring, I did the UCSD Lab Expo, and I met so many great undergrads, like so many that I wish that like they had emailed me, because I would have loved to have had them as mentees. So, yeah.
Yeah, contrary to popular opinion, the school does not shut down in the summer, so there's a lot going on here still. Okay, so for the second part is how to succeed in the lab, and I have a number of questions, but you're always free to add anything else you can think is relevant. So how much time should I be spending in the lab?
I think it depends on your other obligations that you have. Like, of course, you have classes, and like if you're taking like organic chemistry one quarter, maybe you can't spend that much time in the lab. And I think you should be honest, like with yourself and with your, you know, mentor about that. So it's like, that's not like a hard number, but like, I think just being upfront about, you know, should is like also dependent on what you want to get out of it. Like, are you here to, you know, stay for multiple years and you want to lead your own project? If so, that's really cool, but maybe then you should think about spending more time. But if you're here just for experience, you're not really sure if this is what you want to do, then like obviously show up consistently, you know, have a, you know, very enthusiastic, good work ethic, but like maybe you don't need to like be spending all of your time here. But I think just being straightforward about your commitments and what your goals are, I think would help inform that decision a lot.
I think that I don't know if this applies to other like versions of labs in different fields, but the one that applies to me the most is like if I'm mentoring somebody, it's really nice to have a large chunk of time with them. And it doesn't have to be every day, but it could be like if you can have one day where you're not attending many classes, or maybe you're only attending one, the rest of your time or your free time kind of like spent in the lab, whether that be like 4 or 5 hours that day or maybe 3. But I think like 3 is the minimum sometimes, because if I'm a mentor, like I don't want to just give you like an hour of my time because I have to show you how to like work the equipment, electronics, those types of things. So I'd rather have longer periods, but like less time, or less days with you, versus like seeing you every day for like 30 minutes to an hour. But I think that works differently in different labs. But for molecular neuroscientists, I think it's larger chunks because larger experiments happen.
And a related question, sorry, and then I'll let Sydney go, is what's the balance between spending time on lab work like remotely versus going in person?
Yeah, I think that's very dependent on field. Like my research assistants in the past have been great working remotely, just because like I work with data that already exists. I'm not culturing cells. They were just writing code, and they can send me screenshots of their errors and I can help them debug. So yeah, there's a lot of that. And so usually like the undergrads that I've been working with, they've all been paid, and they're paid for 10 hours a week. And that 10 hours is however they want to fit it into their schedule. They do that as long as they meet with me for an hour every week as like a solid check-in. How are we doing? What's the progress of this? So we can really just get a good time to work together. Otherwise, they're just kind of messaging me on Slack whenever they need help. And that model really works for me and my mentees as well.
Yeah, I think being present definitely has its advantages. I think the type of work you do, Sydney, like works because they're on Slack, so you see that they're working. But if students often come to me and say, I don't want to come into lab ever, I think, okay, how do I know that you're trying and making progress? But yeah, it definitely depends on the work.
I usually know that they're trying and making progress is when they bring me things. It's like, you're not just going to like skirt by under the radar and like come up to the end of the quarter and have nothing, or else like we're not going to do another quarter working together. It's like I keep an eye on you by knowing that you're like bringing me things and making progress and making figures and running into issues, because if you're not running into issues, what's going on? Like, yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, how often should I meet with my supervisor and or PI?
I think it depends on like how you like to be mentored. So like this is probably a really good way to figure that out as well. For me, I don't really like helicopter parenting. So if I meet with my PI too often, I think I get too much feedback from them, and then I have 80 billion things to implement, and I'm like, I'm not ready for any of them. So I like to meet with them probably once a week or once every other week, just to get my bearings, show the progress that I've been making, hear the feedback, and then show what my plan is for the next week after. That usually works for me. But if you're working like with somebody hands on deck, like really closely, I think like even just like midweek check-ins, like maybe that needs to happen more often, just because like if it's experimental or things change, you might need to like see like how it's changing and what other things you need to prepare before an experiment. So I would say close mentors, like hands-on people or hands-on experiments, close mentors, probably more than like maybe twice a week. But it doesn't have to be like a sit down. It could be like a quick Slack message, like Sydney was saying, like, hey, this is what I'm up to, like this is what I'm trying, and like here's my progress so far, and this is where I need help or something. But with a PI, I would say like once a month or once every other week. Or sorry, twice a month or once a week.
Yeah, I think with my like mentees, I think I check in with them, like just a quick in passing, like, how's it going? Do you need anything? Like, and I like that, like probably every other day, but it's really just like, I see them in the lab and I'm just like, are you doing okay? And I think that works well, because it gives them a really informal chance to be like, no, actually, I'm not okay, and I need help, and I've been stressed about it for 24 hours. And then you're like, okay, well, let's figure it out. But with the PI, I think, like Chiaki is saying, like once a week is probably the max in our lab that you would get, and then like once every other week is probably more standard.
Okay, so, oh, sorry, Sydney, go ahead.
Oh, I don't really know if I have anything different to say, but my model is, yeah, that 1 hour once a week of in-person meeting, whether that's over Zoom or hopefully in person, and then periodic check-ins. And I just like to foster that mentee relationship where like they feel comfortable like coming to me with any sort of problem. I'd rather they come to me with more problems than not.
Mhm.
So.
How can I prove that I can work on more challenging projects, or how do I get my own independent research project?
This one, I think taking initiative is a really important thing. Don't expect to be assigned a project. I think that if you have a question, like based on like your last, probably at least like 6 months of research experience in a lab, that like we're during that time where you've been learning all of the skills required to do that research, learning the techniques. And then if you can come up with like a specific question or like something that's like branched off of what your mentor is working on, you can propose that and then work together on like designing a project that can address that. Like I've also had undergrads who will like go out on their own and find a data set, like an open data set that they want to analyze that could potentially answer a question, and they just need my help to like get access to it. And I'm like, oh hell yeah. So that stuff is really fun. It's just seeing someone who's clearly passionate about the work or the question go out and find a data set. I love that.
Yeah, I think for me, I think the most exciting thing that happened recently was one of the undergraduates that I've been working with was like, oh, I read this really cool paper and it's related to our work. Do you think I could talk to the PI about it and like see if I could do something with this? And I'm like, yes. I'm like, yes, yes, you can. And then we like talk through, and it's just like, I think when you get your like mentor, the person that you work really close with, like, and you show them this like enthusiasm too, if it's not the PI that you're working directly with, that also gives you another person who, when you go and talk to the PI, they can be like, I've seen this undergraduate working really hard. I've seen their enthusiasm. Like I've seen all of this stuff. Like and then that gives kind of another person to like go to bat for you. If you're like, I'm going to take the initiative and ask for this. And now I also have the support from some of my lab mates.
Yeah. I think it's also just knowing expectations. Like if you're working like 10 hours a week, or sorry, that's a lot. But if you're working like 2 to 5 hours a week, you're probably not going to be trusted with an independent project. Like if you're not able to dedicate a lot of time to it. So just like know what you're putting in and then ask for different responsibilities. And if you feel like your repertoire of responsibilities is increasing, then I think you're totally, and like Emma's saying and Sydney's saying, is like with the enthusiasm and your responsibilities increased, I think you're totally able to ask for an independent project and just say like, hey, is there like a piece of this that I can take away that I can maybe like run with a little bit more? Or I'm interested in having my own independent project. Where do you see that fitting in the lab? And then reaching a conversation with your PI.
Yeah, this is a question I care a lot about because I think it really makes the difference between those who just want something on their resume or people who expect things to happen for them versus those who take initiative and pursue their interests. I remember one lab that I wanted to join, the PI was like a lot of other PIs here. They kind of accepted everyone and then see who filtered through. So I just, showed up every day, even though he didn't establish a schedule because I didn't know what else to do. And eventually I just showed up enough times. So he's like, okay, here's a project. And I was, in the lab when he had an idea for a project because I was shadowing a surgery and, I just happened to be there. So he's like, okay, you can take it. So I think showing up, taking initiative definitely is very important.
Yeah. And also I was going to say like, take ownership. Like you are like creating the data, you're analyzing the data, you're like manipulating it, doing whatever. You are the scientist that is doing the work. So like take pride in that. Like try to increase it as much as possible. Like not everything is going to be rose colored like glasses the entire time. And it's going to be a lot of hard work, and it's not always going to be so easy. Like you just put motivation and it's just going to work, because that's just not how it works. So like, I would just say like, just kind of go in, take ownership of your project, say like, oh, this is mine, and I'm going to like see it to its end. And just kind of like, I don't know, this was like one thing that we looked for a lot in graduate applications when people are applying to the neuroscience grad program, is like, do you have grit? Like in times of like failure and like wavering motivation and things like that, are you still committed? Like, do you still want to keep doing this? Because it is hard and it is a lot of work, but there's a huge payout, and just like really interesting science and getting to discover new things with the community. So
Yeah, and then the one last thing I'll say too is I think undergrads also need to have a perspective change. So it's, yes, they need to gain experience and figure out what their interests are, but it's rare to find a PI who just is mentoring them for the sake of the love of mentorship. And they need to realize that there's a lot of time and training put into them, and they need to, give back to the lab, and need to, learn and show that they can actually achieve the skills that they've been set to do. Okay. How can I get published? That's the next question.
You get published by contributing significantly to a project. You should be essential to that project, basically. The undergrads who I have included on my papers have been like extremely vital to the data collection process. Like they were the ones like showing up at the hospital at 7 a.m. to record data with patients. I had one that really took initiative into understanding like these clinical ratings that were really like challenging and really approaching the statistics with a lot of just really methodically, and I was really impressed with their work, and I thought that like their work also, like I couldn't have done the rest of the project without them, and that was what made me want to put them on my papers.
Yeah, I think it's asking yourself that question of, could this project have gone forward without me? Like maybe it could have even without you, even if you are included, but it's like, would it have been significantly harder for the other people working on it if I wasn't there? And I think that that's a good metric to know if like being published is your goal. Like you should try, like Sydney's saying, like make yourself as essential as possible to this project. So that might involve asking for more responsibilities, and like trying to like branch out into like different areas of the project, rather than just saying like, okay, this is the, the very narrow aspect that I'm working on.
yeah. And also like projects have different timelines than your undergraduate career. So like if you want to get published, like if you work significantly on it, it could be published like 2 years after you graduate or things like that. And sometimes that's kind of uncontrollable. It's really like on the PI and the graduate student's decision, which is unfortunate, but like it's just kind of how it works. I would say like the point is like you're doing a lot of work in order for it to be even published, like putting yourself in the middle, as like Sydney and Emma are saying. And if you have other like publishing goals and you're hoping to like be a part of a paper to show for it, like if I understand that looks good on resumes and looks good on CVs for graduate school. So if you are looking for things like that, you can ask your PI and just be like, are there any like review opportunities that I could try like publishing with? So like doing a review paper or maybe an opinion piece, and just like collaborating on the writing process of it or the literature review would probably get you enough to like, and also analyzing or like writing parts of the paper would probably get you enough for an authorship, and just being like, this would be a really great opportunity and I'd really like to try it if it's possible. Just because like research articles kind of take a really long time to get published.
Also, there are some undergraduate journals that UCSD has. Like I know, I'm forgetting the name of them, but like there are like specifically like campus like science journals that if you want to try and publish something that's like, you could not get published on a regular journal timescale, because like Chiaki is saying, they take forever, but like they have shorter timescale campus undergraduate specific publishing mechanisms that you could use if that's very important.
And also like one thing that I also want to add is publishing doesn't always have to be like a published manuscript in a journal. It can be a conference poster. It's a little like less shiny and everything, but it's still like such great experience. It's an opportunity to go like potentially travel to a conference or even participate in like a mini research conference at your university. But the process of putting together that poster, of making all of those figures, writing everything to create like a good narrative flow within the poster about your science, that is also really good to have in terms of like showing a product of your research experience in a lab.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a publication. Like you said, I like that idea of like getting some alternative, you know, medium. Okay, a couple more questions. What are some do's and don'ts in research and in a lab setting? And in particular, what are some qualities of an outstanding research assistant?
Don't hide mistakes. If you make a mistake, just say it. I literally mess things up constantly. Everyone is messing things up constantly. It's totally fine. Like, even if something is broken, actually, especially if something is broken, you gotta say something. I like, you know, usually you're not gonna be hopefully breaking things, but you know, whatever, even if it is, like, I think just like get it out as soon as you can. Don't hide it. It's fine. Like, nobody is gonna be mad. And if they are, you should question if that is the area that, like, the place that you'd like to be, because everybody has made a mistake all the time. So don't be afraid to say, hey, I messed up.
Yeah, I think we're like the kind of umbrella term for that to me is good communication. Like, be honest, be prompt, be detailed. Like, I can't help you. I can't fix mistakes. We can't be productive unless I know what's going on. And I mean, sometimes that's also like communication about like your life and the demands that are going on in my undergrad's life. Like, sometimes like bad things happen and it's going to slow stuff down for a while. And if I don't know what's going on, like, I don't want to add pressure to your life that's already hard enough. Like, I want this research experience to help you in every way possible. So yeah, communication.
Yeah. Communication is key. Like, I was just going to say, don't be flaky, but that is also good communication, right? So making sure like you're on time, you say you're going to be where you're going to be, and like you're communicating where you are and what you're doing and how well you're doing, or even if you're not doing well, like you're saying those things. Because like you don't have to be like perfect. No person is perfect. So if like you mess something up and you want to go recollect new data or something, good on you. But like you can say that. You can say like, I have to retry this and I'm so sorry, or like things like that.
I think also
Some do's. Oh, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, take a lot of notes. Like, even about like, I love when, and I did this as an undergrad, I still do this now. If someone is showing me how to do something, the first time I am like looking up and writing in my lab notebook, and then looking up and writing in my lab notebook, writing things of like, where are they putting this thing? What does this thing look like? You know, where, how exactly are they putting these two things together? Because like you might do that protocol with your mentor for like a week, and then maybe you think you won't need it, okay? But then you'll come back to that protocol like a month later, and in your mentor's mind, they're thinking, I already showed them how to do this. I don't need to show them again. But you know, sometimes after like a month of not doing something, you don't remember how everything goes and fits together. So if you have, and maybe even more detailed, you know, version than you might think that you need, if you have it, you can look at it and then you can say, okay, I read this, I understand this, I still have some questions, but then you come to your mentor with like 5 questions instead of 25 questions, you know? And I think that is like very key. So enthusiasm and note-taking abilities, good qualities.
Pictures, taking pictures, as long as it's okay with your mentor, is good for that too.
I was gonna say, like, ask a ton of questions. Like, I don't really want to be saying things that don't make sense to you. So there's a way that I can explain things better as a mentor. I'd rather know. So like, ask a ton of questions as a mentee. That also shows me that you're listening and you're actively participating. So yeah, just fire away and I'll answer them.
Yeah, I think a lot of students are worried about looking dumb or not knowing something or not understanding, but yeah, they need to ask
Oh my God.
questions.
Yeah, I mean, you're always gonna, okay, like the thing that my mentor used to tell me is like, you're always gonna be dumb unless you ask, because like you're just gonna be dumb and silent.
Yeah.
It's not ideal. So might as well just like ask the question, even if you feel like it's gonna make you look stupid, it doesn't matter. Like you're gonna start from a place like that no matter what. So
And a lot of times I feel like mentors, they're so used to whatever concept they're explaining that they forgot to explain the basics. So it's also on them. And it's good to just remind them, like, actually, I don't know this concept that you think is easy to understand. You just got to remind them that not everyone's a PhD.
oh, I was gonna say another don't that I would be careful with is like so if you're working closely with a mentor, I've like had this happen with some people before, is like if you're working closely with a graduate student or postdoc, and then you decide to like meet separately with the PI, that's totally good. But just make sure that the communication streams are equal and the same. And you don't want to like circumvent and like say something differently to your PI. That is not the expectation. So like if you say that there's more progress to your PI, that's like not actually the case. It's not gonna be okay. So make sure like just as going before like effective communication, you're respecting all the boundaries between those relationships and that you're not trying to like give crosstalk to that. And to make that easier, just have a meeting, have a group meeting and not like individualized ones either.
I would say also if your mentor or anyone gives you something to read it. Even if you don't understand it. If you don't, that's fine. If you don't understand it, come with questions. But like if someone writes you a protocol, if they give you a paper, if they're doing anything that is for you to read, they're giving it to you for a reason. So even if you don't fully understand what the reason is, ask them to explain why. If you don't understand the concept of what they gave you, read it and then ask them the concept. But like if you just look at something that they gave you and say, oh, this looks really complicated and hard, nah, I'm not going to read it. But then they're thinking, oh, I gave this to them. They're going to read it. And then that's going to inform something that we're doing later. And then you don't understand. It's kind of like, it's like you're fumbling around in the dark almost. And they gave you a light switch, but it's like, ask how to turn off the light switch if you don't know how, but they're trying to help. So use the tools that are given to you to help.
Yeah, in that vein, I'd say like try to show up to lab meetings, or if there are talks that they send links to, go to those, or if they offer to pay for you to go to a course, then show up to the course. That is very important. Just taking those extra steps above the bare minimum, I think is always good, and following through. Okay. I had another thought, but I can't remember right now. If you guys have other thoughts about do's and don'ts, or how to succeed, let me know. I have one last question. Okay, what should I do if I have a toxic advisor? Or if I'm not happy in the lab?
That's a good question. Hopefully you've been communicative enough with your direct mentor that the problem has at least like been attempted to be addressed. But if it's just not working out, just give notice. Be honest. You can say, I don't know how like brutally honest. I guess like I would like to hear Chiaki and Emma's thoughts about this, but like I would say maybe like the environment is not a right fit for me. I can't dedicate this amount of time, or like I just don't think this lab is the right place for me to be. I'm so grateful for my time here, but I'm going to come have, or this will be my last 2 weeks in the lab or something. And giving notice is really nice so they know what to expect, so you don't just ghost. But yeah, I've never had an experience with like a super toxic lab like that, so I don't really know.
I will say if it's like toxic, okay. If it's toxic to a point where you need to report something, I think you should use UCSD like centers in order to like gain feedback in order to report things that are uncomfortable or those types of things. So barring like harassment, those types of things, that should be through UCSD and not handled by you at all. If it's like a toxic situation where they want you to work like 60 hours a week, or like they want you to always be in the lab and like work way more than you had agreed upon, and their expectations are changing or fluctuating, things like that. I think there's like kind of like a two-step rule for me where I'm like, I will try to reset my boundaries with them, have like a conversation where I'm like, I thought that these were the expectations. Can you tell me what your expectations are? Maybe I'm like misunderstanding something, or, if it's changing, I would really like to know so that I can plan for the future. And then upon hearing like their new boundaries, their new expectations for you, if those are things that you cannot do, I would totally go with what Sydney just said, which is like, I really appreciate my time here. I just don't think that this is working out for me personally. And I really appreciate the research and your mentorship, but I think I want to like take a break or find another mentor, things like that. So
Yeah, I think undergraduates, they should be diplomatic, but they always have a right to leave. Like, I mean, technically anyone in the lab has a right to leave if it's a toxic environment. But I agree that you should be diplomatic and you should give notice. And then, that way you're not burning a bridge, even if this person is toxic. If it's, not to a level of like harassment or like what Chiaki was talking about. In that case, report. But like anything below that, you should just you can make your exit with grace. And that way you're keeping your boundaries and like what's good for you and your expectations and what you can handle. And but if you need something from them in the future, or you go back into research and you work in a different lab, maybe they know the PI in the other labs, you don't want to like just keep everything as civil as you can. Again, if it's below the level of harassment, as soon as it escalates to that.
yeah. And also, I'm making the assumption that you have a toxic PI, but let's say you have a toxic graduate mentor or postdoc mentor. I would, try to talk to the PI if that were the case and just say like, hey, I think this is the arrangement that we had made up, but now my responsibilities are changing. I think maybe a conversation between the three of us would be productive or something. Could we do something like that? But like allow grace, right? Allow empathy, allow like a little bit of time for compassion, because maybe that person is stressed out. Like maybe they didn't mean to take something out on you, but they had, unfortunately, you're allowed to not take it completely. Like if you wanted to quit, you could absolutely do that. But if you want to give a little bit of like understanding and see like what's happening, take that one meeting at least. And then if it doesn't work out from there, just be like, all right, I'm done.
Yeah, hopefully if they've watched this video, they'll find a great lab with a good fit and establish, I think, good lines of communication, expectations. I think not being afraid to talk about expectations from the beginning is always important.
Oh, can I just add one thing? Oh, sorry. One thing that you should do is like take feedback well, because like I think sometimes it's the reason it gets toxic is a lot of like missed expectations and misunderstandings of those expectations. So if somebody like your PI is giving you feedback, it's not toxic behavior. I mean, it can be, but it's not always that way. Like I'm sure that they're trying to like say like, if you had put a little bit more effort in this project, like maybe it would have changed into this or something like that. I think they're just trying to tell you like inflection points that you could have put in more effort, or you could have tried a little bit harder, and that it's ultimately for your growth. So I would say like try to listen with open ears, as much as it might like hurt or feel bad. Like, take that, absorb that, feel that, and then just try to figure out like what are ways or next steps that you can kind of do better in your expectations or realign them. So that's another like I guess, is like hear feedback and like try to ask for it as well.
Yeah,
If that like if you're on that line of like, is this feedback toxic or not, and you have a good like direct mentor, like a grad student or a postdoc, you can talk to them about it, because I guarantee you they're getting feedback from the PI in the same way or even more. So it's like,
Yes.
you can always like make sure the PI can't hear you, like make sure their office door is closed when you talk to them about this, or talk to them outside of the lab. But like I feel like you can always ask and be like, hey, like I had this conversation with the PI, I felt this way, this is what was said, is that normal, how do we feel? Because then you get a little bit of a check. And if you have anyone else who's a friend who's an undergraduate who works in another lab, you can sort of like check in with them and say like, hey, my PI said this thing to me, or my mentor said this thing to me, is that normal? Do your mentors say these kinds of things to you too? Because then you can determine if it's like, is this a toxic situation, is this just tough feedback, like where's the line there?
And those are things that like about lab culture in general that you can kind of learn by spending a little bit more time in the lab in the first few months. Maybe you're like going to lab meetings, having lunch with some of the people in the lab, just kind of testing the waters about what expectations are like. Is the environment wholesome or toxic? So
Yeah, I'm glad you guys brought up that last point. I think being able to listen to feedback is super important. I mean, research will destroy your ego and you can't have one, and you need to be able to learn because that's the whole point. No one's going to be good from the beginning. And, hearing things like you need to improve your writing and you need to learn the skill is just good feedback. Yeah. So that sums up all my questions. But if you guys have any other last minute like points, tips, resources you can think of, I'll also provide a summary of your written statements with this video too. Yeah.
For resources, I would say like there's a lot of people that apply to like NSF and these types of things, and they publicly resource their like essays and things online. Look through their like resumes, look through their CVs, like try to see like how other graduate students are trying to like move through their career. And if that's something that you want to do, like try to schedule like a coffee or whatever. Like graduate students, I would say for the most part are pretty harmless. So if you want to like reach out to them and ask them questions, like you can totally do that, and that's okay. Like if it's a little bit too much of a step up to cold email a professor, cold email a graduate student, and you probably will have a lot of like honest and true feedback.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who get DMs on Twitter and or various like social media, especially like if you're
Definitely.
a science communicator on Twitter or Instagram.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate your time. I'm gonna stop the recording.